Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. I think this is the last official lecture that we're gonna do for this class, and lab. And then next week, if you want to come, then I'll do final review. If not, we can do, recorded video posts. I'm not gonna require you to submit final review, but you should watch the video if you can't participate. We're gonna go over from like unit 1 until this last unit, which is unit 12. We have a little bit of mishap with PO where test out purchase was supposed to be placed, but then they bought. Because CompTIA owns test out and exam voucher. So we got you exam voucher, which is very expensive, right? We spent close to $100,000 buying exam vouchers. So after this class, if you do want to sit for the CYSA, make sure you study and then you email me. I did buy some CYSA, and also Pen Test Plus in other area. So if you want to start with A+, you can do that. So make sure you send me an email. And then also, if you are not yet an apprentice or pre-apprentice, make sure that you get through the process, right? I posted a page on there, but you can go to the website. That gives you access to transfer scholarship, all these vouchers, and then they can help you get work. But making sure that we do that. And she has some orientation that's coming up soon. So make sure you do that. Otherwise, you're gonna have to wait a few months. So I'll show you when we have some time after the lecture to where you can find that information. Okay, so we're gonna go over unit 12. This is gonna be chapter 14 and 15. This is the last part of the text. I modified this assignment a little bit because I feel like there's some parts of it that you need to know as an analyst. So we're going to talk about eradication and containment and recovery, but some of this also in chapter 15, we're going to talk about risk management, which is really important for our profession. That's mostly the area that we address, right? So last time we talked about incident response and how to monitor things. So these are basically the suggested activities that you would be planning for finalizing after you have been impacted with an incident. So with preparation, detection, and analysis, so this is where a lot of our work performance will be in this area, okay? And then we would do some post-incident activities such as reporting and then doing some improvement planning and so on. And then we come back here again and the cycle continues, and this is why this profession is highly demanded because it's always changing and it's evolving. So in the first few questions, first question it asks you, why is containment a critical activity in incident response procedure? Containment is really a way for us to make sure that the incident doesn't go beyond its scope or it's bound. So the answer to this would be because containment isolate the incident, whether it's malware incident or breach, and prevents it from further impacting the organization. So the whole point is to make sure that we contain the incident and not let it go beyond its boundary. So if you have a breach, you need to stop it from spreading bigger or becoming bigger. If you're having malware, right, you want to stop it from spreading. So that is just a way that we can contain a problem or an incident. And with that, we would lower the impact of other systems that could be, right, involved in that particular incident. Hello? Hello. So containment is an important area in how we handle the incident. So how can we contain, right? If you have a malware on the system, you disconnect that system from the network physically. Simply unplug the cable or disable the wireless connection. And in the case, if you can't do any of those, shut it down, right? When we shut it down, we disable all the services, all the communication across. So we can also segment network system, and we touched a little bit on this before when we were talking about monitoring how we can isolate some of the network area is when we can create a virtual local area network or a VLAN. And that way we can contain it in that part of the network. We can quarantine that network through containment. Now, there are ways to get from VLAN into the other area, but if you have the proper security measure, right, in order to get into your other part of the network, it needs to be routed because it is treated like a separate network. And when it's routed into your other private network, you would see that we would then implement filter with firewall, intrusion prevention system, and so on. So virtual LAN is simply using a physical port and using that port to be able to implement a subnetwork through that physical port. And we would do that with IP addressing, right? And then routing. So it would then route all the traffic into that particular physical port on the switch, which is the layer 4 switch. And then from there, it could pass into that virtual local area network segment. So that's one way that we can contain a network subsection. Sorry, let's come back to this real quick. So here it talks about how it is a critical priority, that we don't want things to spread further. You need to refer to Computer Security Incident Response Handling Guides. This is only going to give you guidelines they recommend, but they already have everything laid out. So it really addressed some of the things like theft, damage, right? How you can preserve evidence, the timeline, the resources that you need, what information you should include as a workaround or emergency. So here's the segmentation that we talked about, right? You always want to implement the firewall in between your segmented network because it's being routed in. So that could be an internal firewall, or you can also have it use, we can use border type of firewall. Now here it talks about the primary isolation techniques. So containment is a way that we can isolate, and in isolation, we should isolate affected system, and we should isolate the attacker or threat actors. So the two techniques for isolation based on incident response, we are isolating the affected system and we're isolating the attacker. So how do I know what kind of systems are affected? Usually through monitoring, right? So potentially if you see the traffic targeting those systems, we want to put those systems on a separate segment. And then if you have a user account that is being impacted in an attack, or potentially you see that the account as an attacker, then you want to isolate the attacker. So that means that we will probably require to manage the access of the attacker, right? Monitoring the privilege and how this particular account exists in the system. you can disable the account, but the attacker would find its way to other accounts. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? So we can block IP addresses and MAC addresses, and that's important because ultimately it's going to come in, the attacker is going to come in as traffic from the outside, which uses public IP. And then once they get on the inside, private IP and MAC address. Any question? So for the containment that is most effective, which containment technique is most effective in the incident response? It's going to be removal. Unfortunately, we can't remove malware. Malware is usually contained because malware impacts system files. And if you remove system files, your system becomes corrupted. But removal is the most effective containment technique in general, right? It doesn't work with everything, but removal can work with some other areas. For example, if you have internal threat, right, like a disgruntled employee, removal of that employee is probably the best thing for that organization, right? Because that person can cause a lot of internal issues with other employees and possibly commit other type of activities that would cause the company to have higher risk. So removal is the best containment technique. Make sure we remember these things for the finals. So how can you identify the attacker? Right? What should be considered when you're pursuing attacker identification? Most attacker would have different type of goals or objectives. It really is a way that, you know, why they're pursuing a certain type of system or committing to a certain attack. So a lot of it comes down to, hello, your business value. And your business value really speaks to why are they attacking your organization compared to containment, eradication, and recovery activities. So it's probably ideal to really understand the perspective of the attacker, the goals of the attacker, the objectives of the attacker based on your business value. So what would that be, right? Like your assets value, that your critical system, it doesn't just mean that system costs. So a server might cost you $10,000, but its operation is worth a lot more to the company overall business, right, incentive or business profit. So for example, if I'm an e-commerce company, I might spend, you know, a certain amount of money on my cloud servers or even my internal servers. But ultimately, it's going to bring me 100 times, 200 times revenue. And that's why I am a business. So your business value for that system is really correlated to how critical it is in operation. And that risk level, right, is heightened for that particular system if it is under attack. So that means that you have to really look at what could be targeted and how that can impact your business value. Okay. Now, containment, eradication, and recovery is just a reactive approach. So by that time, it's already late, right? So what you need to do is you need to have more proper planning and assessment, and this is where analyst comes in, your role, to really understand what could possibly go wrong, right? We want to prepare for the worst, and that's our job. Any question? So earlier we talked about removal is the best containment technique, right? So that means that you want to contain, you want to stop it from extending to further area or other system. But eradication is used in incident handling is a way that we extract artifacts or evidence for the incident from a certain system. So when you hear the term eradication, it really means that we want to be able to find, right, and obtain artifacts about that incident. So if you have something that is, let's say, a person committing fraud, right, you want to be able to find the information about that particular case, which are artifacts, could be files, could be emails, could be network traffic, could be chat, could be communication. There are a lot of different things that can be involved in that case. So when you eradicate, you are really pulling the artifacts from that system because it's pertaining to that incident, that fraudulent incident. Now, if you don't eradicate, it's going to stay on that system and it's going to remain on the organization network, right? So you want to make sure that it is in its container or in a place where, but incident could also be malware. So, we have to really look at what kind of incident that is. But eradicate is just to remove the artifacts that's related to the incident. Any question? So earlier we talked about containment, right? So if you put an isolated network, you can have a quarantine network and you can prevent that from impacting your regular network through security appliance and configuration. And then here it talks about removal. Ideally, I think that's probably the best approach, but it doesn't always work out that way. So keep in mind that you can't. Our intention is to remove a lot of the problems or the issue. And then here it talks about evidence gathering. So when you're gathering evidence, right, make sure that we put down serial number, model number. We touched on this before when we talked about forensic. Host name, your system name is very important. MAC address related to those system, IP addresses. So my rule of thumb is anything to identify that system you write down, right? So, drive model number, system model number, everything that relates to the identification of that system, serial number, host name, etc. So logical identification is your host name, your MAC address, your IP address, and then the physical identification of that system is the serial number and the model number. So make sure we record those. And then also the people, the users, that's very important. Your timestamp and your time of occurrence is always essential. So we want to make sure we capture that. So for us, I think a lot of the times when you identify your attacker, you're going to see them as addresses or network traffic. Okay. And then if they are already on your network, then they become user accounts. But we hope to not let them be on our network. So if they're in your compromised system, then it is a lot more difficult to identify. Here it talks about eradication. This is on page 3. I'm sorry, 5, and then for recovery. So recovery is really the phase where we bounce back. We come back to we try to come back to how it was before, after the incident. And we would correct security control. That's really important. Okay. So when you have an incident, that means that you have a security problem, and when you recover is when you need to close your security gap, fix the problem, right? Not just to come back to how it was before, but also fix the problem so it doesn't happen again. That means you need to patch, you need to reconfigure, especially your security appliance. You need to update, especially your AV or your anti-malware and activities. Okay. So the goal for recovery is to rebuild, but also to be more successful in overcoming future attacks. So the areas that you need to recover would require that you re-image your system, right? If you have an original image, what you can do is you can take a look at that image and see what areas of security that you can implement, what things you can update on that image. It's because it's software, right? Like, so we want to make sure that we have some type of patching mechanism for our existing image, and then be able to re-image those onto the system that was impacted. So the critical element of implementing secure recovery to correct the control deficiencies that led to the original attack is to understand the root cause of the attack. All attacks stems from vulnerabilities. All attacks. 0-day attack. So when I teach ethical hacking, every single week we go over different types of attack, and the attack always play on some kind of vulnerabilities, whether it's protocol vulnerabilities, encryption vulnerabilities, right? User vulnerabilities like weak passwords, things like that, every single attack. So it's really simple in really how you look at it. If you're looking at denial of service attack, look at how your servers are handling requests, right? Look at how you're protecting those servers, how you're monitoring the traffic to that server, especially the requests, right? If we are able to set up rules to mitigate a lot of the requests at once, we wouldn't have the attack. So understanding the root cause in the attack, look at your target system and its deficiency. That's all you need to do, right? It sounds simple. Sometimes it encompasses many things. What if they did 5 different types of attacks? Well, you have to narrow it down to each single area. And that could be your responsibility. Remember, every single attack has a set of vulnerability, at least one. So find the vulnerabilities and you find the problem, the root cause. Okay? We have tools for those, but you have to also sometimes think to solve the problem, right? So it's all about logical, understanding of what's happening to that system, how it's communicated, or what's being used on that system, the services. Okay, so the type of activities that's needed for recovery phase is rebuilding and patching, configuring, updating, and restoring services. This takes time, okay? You saw how I bring up Caesar Palace because I think that's the most larger incident that we see nationwide. It took them at least close to a week to get all their web server back up again because people were using that to book hotel at the casinos. And not just Caesar Palace, right? All their sister casinos were also impacted because it was attacked as a group. So, but Caesar was most impacted. So rebuilding and re-imaging. So they're pulling all the images, all the backup from the prior days, putting all the data back. And so when you are preparing for those risks, you have to really quantify, right? Your point of recovery, the time for recovery. You go back to your security plan and you look at how long each type of system takes. right? Web server will take a certain amount of time. It's not something instant. If you have fail over cluster, that's great. You can put those up, but then you gotta synchronize all the data and making sure. Because you have customers that already have data in the database. So once you rebuild, you have to patch them to close out the vulnerability on the system, making sure that they're patched. Very important. Software updates, right? OS updates, sometimes driver updates, firmware updates. When you're dealing with IoTs, firmware updates. And then because they are, if it's a breach, if they're able to get in, that means your security appliance is not doing its job. That means that we're misconfiguring our system, right? If you're blacklisting, like I said before, your list would continue to grow every single time. We can't just configure once and let it be. That's how they can look at that. So if they can match the IP coming in, then they can overcome your firewall. If they can go undetected with your intrusion prevention system, then they're in. So make sure that we reconfigure your security appliance, especially the firewall. And then we also need to update signature for AV or your antivirus or your anti-malware system, if it's malware related, but this should always be frequently done, regularly done. And then when we're restoring services, right? Our system might be up, but sometimes the services is not ready. I remember, I think it took Caesar after their web servers were up, it took a day or so for all the transactional, all the database stuff to kind of carry through. Because, you know, pulling all of the data, you have to restore from your previous and then your full backup. So that can be a lot, especially if it's many systems that are impacted at once like that. And then because if it's ransomware related, then your anti-malware signature is a must. And then you got to train your people, right? Any question? Okay, so you find the information right here. And it gives you the scenario on how to really look at the impacted system. It's important to point this out. You should focus on the system that are directly involved first, the compromised system, and then work your way outward. Make sure that you do not get distracted. I understand, right? I go down that rabbit hole all the time. Because once I find something and then I find another thing and then I started branching off. But you need to really list the things that you need to, your priority first. So the compromise system needs to be targeted first. That needs to be addressed first. That's highest priority. And then you working your way outwards to other systems that are affiliated. So you start with the center and then you're working your way out. Okay. Because in the case like Caesar, you're going to have many systems at once. And you have to focus on the critical area of the business, right? So they said, okay, well, online customers are going to be the most important first, and then we will have the casino goers. So those systems came up next, right? All the casino machines, and then eventually all the other areas. Okay. So let me move this down a little. So for 9, it says, what should you do after the attacker has compromised the system? You need to rebuild the system from your prior backup. And I think most of you have taken CIS27 with me or other like CIS25 with me, but if you haven't, right, we talked about how we always perform a full backup to start. And then you can do an incremental or differential backup. Okay. Increment from the prior day. So if you're building backup on, let's say, so I start a full backup on Monday, I can increment on that Tuesday and then Tuesday and then Wednesday built on the Tuesday. So as you can see, when we restore, we're gonna have to roll back up to the Monday and we're gonna restore. So if we are compromised on Thursday, right, we have to pull a full, right, restore from a full backup and then the increment on the Wednesday. With the differential, you're gonna have to pull from the full backup on Monday, the difference on Tuesday, the difference on Wednesday, and you would have your, and assuming that it happens on Thursday morning, right? Likely that you're gonna lose some data either way, right? Unless you do live backup all the time, which most systems don't, right? There are companies like, you know, Meta or Google, they have the resources to do that, but a lot of the smaller business, they do backup at the end of the day. Or half day. Okay. So you're gonna rebuild from the prior backup or the images instead of reconfiguring the compromised system. That means that compromised system gets wiped, right? And then re-image and back up the data, right? Because if you are reconfigure that compromised system, if they already have a backup installed, they will come back to that system. Okay. So you need to make sure that you have a failover system. You put that image on that failover system before you take it down, especially for the server. Okay, so when we dispose media, drives, SDs, anything that has storage, even RAM, right? You need to clear, purge, or and destroy. So when we clear, we zero out all the data. You can use software to do that. And you need to do it multiple times. So if you do it 3, 4, 5 pass, it clears, because dynamically writing storage system, right? When you write the 0, it doesn't necessarily put it all in all the area, but if you pass over it a few times, right? Formatting doesn't clear. Formatting is just rewriting over existing area, but if you're clearing, you need to zero out all your data. And there are many different type of technology, free ones and proprietary ones. You can do that. You can also purge data, right? But my opinion, I think wiping out and zero out all the data, that will be good. And then physically destroy the actual device is important. I know companies have punch through where they use like really large nail like, and it will punch through the disk or the storage. And then if it's micro SD, you can just simply dispose it, right? People throw it into a fireplace or, you know, things. And even in some cases, even if you wait and people can use fragments of it, they might be able to restore. I've seen, you know, devices that can read pieces of the drive, like platter of drives, the hard drives. So if we physically destroy and punch through a lot of the storage, they cannot be reused. So whenever that you dispose system, when the system go through the process of, we're gonna retire that system, right? Even if you donate that system, you're gonna clear it. Make sure that all the data is gone on it, okay? Okay. Anything on eradication, containment, and recovery? We're gonna talk about risk assessment and management. So, you know, usually risk management is its own class, right? It entails many different things. So if you go for a bachelor degree in cybersecurity, likely that you're gonna have multiple chapters or even a class on it, right? You get a master in cybersecurity, you're gonna get another one on it, right? And it's really, really emphasized because it's all our work is in risk management. So there are two things that we can assess risk, two approach, qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is when we use levels, right? Like low, medium, high. Critical, right? Non-critical. Those are qualitative assessment method. Quantitative assessment use numerical system. 0 through 5, 0 through 10, 1 through 10, a number, or even dollars. Okay. So that risk is worth $5 million, right? Etc. So when we quantify, we would use numerical measurement to assess the risk. So on your notes, it talks about how you can wrap up. We talked about finding the root cause. Your evidence retention, it's really depending on the company's policy, also the regulation, right? Federal and state regulation, it's mandated. Most company would retain 3 to 5 years, sometime longer if it is HIPAA related or other areas, it could be longer. Okay, so here's risk management. Make sure we understand the difference between threats, vulnerability, and risk. I know we harp about this in every security class, but you need to know, right? A threat, events, or things that would have adverse impact on CIA. A threat could be attacker, a threat could be malware, a threat could be a person. Vulnerability is flaw or weakness of the system. It could be software or hardware. And in the attack, it's just simply a threat acting on the vulnerability. A risk is when a vulnerability and threat might exploit, or when a threat exploits the vulnerability, causing a risk. So it's like this. Okay. So when you do risk management, the first thing you need to do is identify your risk. Okay. Once you list those risks, so you simply identify the threats and the vulnerability. And for pen testing, that's easy for us because we can find threats and vulnerabilities by using scanners, right? By talking to people. Then after that, you are going to do risk. You're going to evaluate the risk. Either you qualify them or you quantify them. It's going to look like this. If you qualify them, high, medium, and low, right? Malware on the endpoint, on this one, you use a matrix like this, it's easy to kind of see. Data center intrusion, high, right? So once we identify the risk, we're going to find ways to fix it. Website distributed denial of service attack, high, right? So this is qualification based on magnitude. And then across, here's your Y, here's your X. That's going to be the probability. Low, medium, or high. Now, if we quantify this, this will be percentage, right? Number. Okay. So you want to put down the probability or the likelihood that it would happen, and the magnitude of or the impact level for that risk. So when you do a business impact analysis, a BIA, you need to include these. Either you qualify or you quantify, sometimes both. Okay. So let's do some calculation. It says a company has 2 incidents per month. You've seen something similar to this in CIS47, right? When we talk about AL and all of these acronyms, A company has 2 incidents per month, impacting 2 desktops. Calculate the assets value, your AV, annualized rate of occurrence, your ARO, single loss expectancy, SLE, and annualized rate of occurrence, your ARO. So when we have 2 incidents a year, 2 incidents a month, right? We would take that 2, multiply it by 12 months because there's 12 months in a year. So that means that we have 24 incidents in a year. So your ARO, your annualized rate of occurrence, is 24. Because we have 2 per month, we take 2 times it by 12, we have 24 occurrences in a year. That's high. Your asset value per desktop is basically the cost of the hardware and the software, including the OS. Assuming that it is $2,500, right? Most of your business type of desktop, they run about $2,000. They're meant to last a little longer. Because there are 2 desktop that was impacted, we take that $2,500 per system, multiply it by 2, we know that it's $5,000 for impacting assets per month. $5,000 per month that we lose. So a single loss expectancy, your SLE, is $5,000 because it's 2 computers per incident, right? That's a single loss expectancy. We expect to lose 5,000 per month. And then you multiply that by 24. I'm sorry, by 12, then you get 60,000. So earlier, we're saying that we would have 2 incidents. So impacting 2 desktop, right? So 2 incidents impacting 2 desktop per month. So your annual loss expectancy, so a single loss expectancy is $5,000. And we would multiply that by 12 because each month we might lose $5,000. So in a year, we might lose $60,000 because we take 5,000 times 12. That gives us $60,000 that we might lose. You can also take $2,500, multiply it by 24, you also get $60,000. So in a year, this company is expected to lose $60,000. But it's only pertaining to this area, right? The case that's given here. And there could be other things. So when you quantify, you need to specify. So how do I know? I would go back and look at all the prior incidents that happened. Such as, people causing damage to the system or theft. That could also be it. And then I would calculate out to the dollar. So I would have some kind of expectation of what could be the loss. So we need to know how to do this for the final. And there are several questions that would ask you to calculate something similar, not exactly the same question, to calculate the ALE, the ARO, the SLE, and so on. Okay. So always start out with the number of incidents, then you move your way into looking at assets value and how many assets were impacting in that incident, calculate that, and then look at how much they would lose per incident, And then how many incident a year, you multiply that and be able to quantify how much they would lose in a year, your ALE. So quantitative information is here, right? There's also exposure factor. We didn't really include that in that case. But that just determined the damage, the amount of damage that the asset could be materialized. So if you expect 100% damage, right? Like think about like car accidents when you hear exposure factor, right? Some car accidents is 100% damage. Some car accident is only 25% damage. And so the exposure factor for us, it's really telling us how the risk could destroy the asset at different level. So if you have ransomware, right, likely 100% exposure factor, okay? Because it locks everything. Now, if you have other type of malware, it would be a more of a fraction compared to 100%. So it gives you the definition from each of these. So after you calculate, you qualify or you quantify your risk, you would then do risk mitigation. And risk mitigation does not mean that we would remove the risk. It's just a way that we can reduce the probability or the magnitude of that risk. So we can do it through design, for example, re-engineer some segment of the network. Yeah, updates, fix some of the problem with security control. We might add or install new systems or security appliance. We will likely need to reconfigure, also train people, so that would reduce some of the risk. Okay. Now I added this compared to last year because I really feel like if most of you will work in the area of risk management and risk assessment, you need to know how to use NIST and ISO. When you go to security conferences like the RSA that's happening tomorrow in San Francisco, right? You would most likely hear a lot of solutions that are based on ISO or to, out of the box to implement. But these are guidelines. Think of them as roadmap to certain things. So whenever that you see SP, that special publication, and you can go to this website, there's some link here. I borrowed this from this website actually, and I sized it down so that way it's easy to read. So if you want to conduct risk assessment, follow the roadmap, the guidelines that they gave you, 800-30 for the special publication. If you Google it, you find it, right? Or you go to their website, you search for it. It is a PDF. You're going to have to read through. It gives you the checklist and all of the things that you need, all of the suggestion on what you need to do. Do you have to follow it word for word? You don't have to, but it's a good guideline. So to answer the next question, it asks you which NIST publication can be used for cybersecurity risk assessment and management. You would start with the SP 800-30. This gives you the guidance for cyber risk assessment and management. You can also use 800-37. This gives you detailed step process in managing security and privacy risks. So the 37 is a little bit more specialized where it pertains to privacy, right? So if you're dealing with like customer data and privacy, or even you see some company like Meta, social media, having issues with that, right? I think everybody that's more of the larger tech company that retain private information, that you always have to address it. So we would go to those documentation and we would look at the guidance on how to approach risk assessment and risk management and managing privacy, especially for the 837. Now, there is a thing called the cybersecurity framework from NIST, NIST. And the cybersecurity framework allows you to build your plan and your solutions that will focus in various areas of controls. So NIST SP 853 gives you all these suggestions about the different types of control that you can implement if you don't know what kind of control to use for your solution. And it's grouped into, they call it families, but they're just categories of control. So some of them are logical control, some of them are physical control, some of them are administrative control, right? We talked about defense in depth. We have to have overlapping controls in many different areas. So this is where you would go to find your control information to build out your framework. Then if we're dealing with personal identifiable information, so security number, right? You can use NIST publication 800-122. It tells you all the context-based, the practical, and how you can identify personal identifiable information and when you're handling it. Okay. So for companies are like credit card companies, because they have to be compliant, or they're processing transaction or HIPAA related, you know, so HIPAA has its own set of requirements, right? It's very specific to HIPAA, but NIST is always, so it's good, you know, when you're dealing with personal identifiable information. But you also have organizations that are federally related, like all the agencies, the federal government type of agent, organization, then you have to follow the specific type of documentation. I say you have to, you don't have to, but you should, right? It's guidelines, so it's not a policy. Policy you have to follow, guidelines you do your best to implement. Okay. And then for 16, if you use virtualization technology, Hyper-V, VMware, right? In any form, even on the cloud, you can use NIST 800-125. They give you recommendation on how to implement security for systems like desktop and server that use virtualization technology. You know that a lot of these special publications came about later on, right? You guys are really fortunate to have these things because the people before you already built these things for you. So you can continue to improve. And this is part of the community, right? And this is the organization that they take suggestions from experts, professional organizations, and they build out these documentation. Hi, come on in.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Already.
This is Roslinda. If you don't know her, she's the director of apprenticeship. She wants to tell you something.
Actually, I was gonna make a comment.
Go ahead.
I came for you, but since I have everybody, hi, I'm pretty proud of that. It's in your faces. I'm next door. There's an upcoming orientation if you're interested in becoming a registered free apprentice to apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship. That includes the leadership training that's gonna be coming up. May 13th and 14th. Hold on.
Okay, so we talked about personal identifiable information. We talked about virtualization. We just got a couple more to go, so let's move these down. Then we're in the notes, it talks about some of the activities that you can do in different areas of your framework. So very similar to what we've been talking about, right, since the beginning of this class. In the NIST cybersecurity framework, in the functions of the core, which is the beginning part of the framework, you need to identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. That's really what the chapter is about, right? So 5 functions is identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. You will not need to know NIST for certification, but for practice purposes, you need to know NIST, right? For the industry. So you can wow employers when you interview, and you can say, you know, I learned about NIST and some special documentation that you can use to, you know, implement risk mitigation solution. But first you need to identify the risk and so on. So the functions in cybersecurity framework, we need to identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. Meaning that we need to identify vulnerabilities, threats, and risks. We need to detect, bless you, threats, vulnerability, and risks, right? We need to protect our system by reducing or mitigating the risk. And we can respond to threats, but we want to protect our system by removing or reducing the vulnerabilities as well, right? And then we want to recover, we just touch on recover today. And improve. So later part of the notes, it talks about how you can use NIST cybersecurity framework implementation guidelines, and it's broken into different tiers. The area that focuses on risk awareness and risk response is going to be tier 2. So if you plan to be a cybersecurity auditor, or you plan to be an incident response person, in one way or another, you are going to be involved in risk. And then we want to use some of the guidelines that's provided from this to implement or use it as a checklist, whatever you want, right? So that brings us to the next few things. This is long. I tried to summarize it, but you can grab it from your notes. So for federal agencies, right? If you're looking at a lot of different organization that's related to, you know, whether it's FBI or it could be also be federal system that is, or affiliated system or contractor that's working for the federal agency, supply chain for federal agencies, they need to use NIST SP 853. You might not see that you are going to be working for them one day, but you might be affiliated, or let's say that you're a contractor with DOD, you are working for the federal agency, right? So NIST 800-53. So here are some of the requirements. The checklist include, you need to categorize your data for classification purposes. So all the system that contain data, you need to categorize like public, confidential, private data, and apply the appropriate protection for different level of data. That's first. So once you do that, you would move to step 2. You need to make sure that you have control at the baseline to protect the information, protect the data, right, in those classes. Then once you implement the control, you need to assess the control and refine the control, right? We want to make sure that is it effective? What kind of what level of effectiveness is it? And then we want to make sure that we improve or refine to make sure that the control is done correctly. Then we want to use design, development, and implementation of the control in the security plan. It might sound really general, right? It reflects back to what we saw earlier in your notes, design, development, and implementation. So design is we can design security solution, such as, training program for the users against phishing, like a phishing campaign. We can redesign a certain part of the network. We can develop policies, procedures, and things to make sure that people are following and their structure to security plan. And we can implement control, configuration, right? Applying firewall rules, setting up firewall rules, and so on. So once you have the control, you would implement the security controls, you would monitor the performance and checking to see how effective is the control. And then you need to determine the risk that's based on the security control, because nothing is perfect. So even if you have the control, there potentially might be risk from those control or existing risks with before the control, right? We want to reduce those risks, but they still might exist. And then we know that those risks exist, so we have to accept those risks. Sometimes we can transfer those risks to other entity, like insurance company. But in the case that we cannot, we have to accept those risks. So we want to authorize the information system that's based for the acceptable risk. And we always want to monitor the control and even the environment, so that way we can manage the effectiveness, the changes, and the compliance. And if you fulfill these 9 areas, you mostly address a lot of the things for your security solutions. It encompasses a lot of different things. So, and then lastly, I want to touch on ISO, because one of you or many of you might work internationally or companies that have international facilities. Okay, so you need to know the difference. NIST is used for national base, so in United States. Okay, anything that's governed by the United States, NIST framework. But if you go international, you need to use ISO. And the one that we use in IT and cybersecurity is 27001. It is globally recognized in Europe, anywhere in the world. Everybody implement ISO 27001. So that's going to give you global-based guidelines. So here are the differences. The NIST framework, it is self-certified framework, but it does not require outside certification. That means that when you go through the certification, think of it like once you certify the company with the NIST framework, the company have met a certain requirement for NIST framework, right? Like we get recognized that we are doing something correctly for cybersecurity, at least at the recommendation level. So you don't need to have someone to certify you from the outside. You don't need an external auditor to certify you. So as you go through the checklist, you implemented that, you contact them, you let them know that you want to certify, and that, then you are certified for it. For the ISO 27001, it is a recognized certification, but it is gonna be audited. That means that every so often, in order to meet that requirement, you're gonna have an external auditor, right, that is qualified to audit for ISO 27001. They're gonna come and check to maintain that certification, right? So when you see a company that's certified with ISO 27001, they go through the step process, then they are also being audited at least once a year. This is free. And ISO, you pay a fee. This is why you see a lot of people at the conference selling ISO 27001 solution. Everywhere you go, prop-based, you know, all the tables usually you see, especially with cybersecurity. So for this, it's suitable for organization that's starting to build out security solution and looking at specific area vulnerabilities, or if they already have breaches and responding that they didn't have security solution before. This is good for that. It's really a good, you know, it gives you some of the baby step into building some of that out. ISO 27001 is best for a company that already have security framework or program in place. And if they want to elevate and get additional certification globally, it is ideal. So for a new company to cybersecurity, we would recommend this, right? And then for some company that already have security in place, but they want to heighten their security planning and improvement, we would recommend ISO 27001. Okay, so now you know the difference. And that is some level for master students. You know, a lot of people, I've taught before for management type of level, some of them don't know the difference between these two, right? But in master's level, you have to use a document and you write out the plan. So that's the next level for you, is to look through the documentation and then think of, you know, each steps on what kind of things that you would do. So in fall semester, I'm teaching the CIS41D, which is advanced security practice. I'm going to teach you how to be a consultant at that level. Okay, so leaving here, you should be able to advise people, right? So you're going to get an RFP, which is a case scenario of the network, the components, all of that. You look at it and you would identify like what's wrong with it, what's the issues, what should you fix, what kind of things you should implement, so you deliver a security solution as a consultant. Okay, so 41D in the fall. Any questions? 41B in the summer. So 41B as in boy, that one is cybersecurity healthcare. That one is in the summer. So that's a HIPAA class. And then 41D as in David in the summer, in the fall, that's the advanced security practice. That one was building solutions for the overall organizations, understanding security planning. It's the first time we're gonna offer it, and I feel like we have enough students to be able to run those, because, you know, I wrote it years ago, and so we'll have fun in that class. We'll do some hands-on. We'll also do some more of like looking at some administrative approaches and then looking at technical solutions to align that, right? So, but you have a business case, you have an RFP, like, you know, an organization with, you know, when you design a network or redesign their network to build out security solutions. RFP is request for proposal, right? So when a company is looking for security solutions, they would give you, this is what we have, right? And this, see how you respond. So basically, you know, respond to the request for proposal with the security solution. Okay, any question? All right, I'm gonna stop the recording for the lecture.